3 million years ago, the world was a very different place. Across the vast African wilderness, there were no cities, no roads, and no walls to protect those who were weak. There were only endless grasslands, thick forests, dangerous rivers, and powerful predators that ruled the land. For a young, prehistoric girl, every sunrise meant another day of survival. She lived among a small group of early humans who moved constantly in search of water, fruit, roots, and small animals. Their lives depended on the seasons, their knowledge of the land, and their ability to stay away from predators. But this morning was different. The girl had wandered farther from her group than ever before. She followed the sound of running water through dense vegetation, carefully stepping over exposed roots and fallen branches. The forest was strangely quiet. Birds had stopped calling. Even the insects seemed to have disappeared. She did not know it yet, but something was watching her. Behind a massive ancient tree, two bright eyes followed her every movement. A jaguar. The powerful predator remained completely still, hidden among the shadows. The girl suddenly stopped. She could feel that she was not alone. Slowly, she turned around. At first, she saw nothing. Then the leaves moved. A massive jaguar stepped out from the darkness. The girl froze. Her breathing became faster. Her entire body trembled with fear. The jaguar stared directly into her eyes. For a moment, neither of them moved. The girl knew that one wrong movement could mean the end of her life. But something unexpected happened. The jaguar did not attack. Instead, it slowly lowered its head. The girl remained motionless. She watched the enormous animal carefully, trying to understand its behavior. Then the jaguar turned away. It walked several steps toward the trees and stopped. It looked back at her, almost as if it wanted her to follow. The girl hesitated. Fear told her to run, but curiosity. The first hunter stepped forward. The jaguar immediately reacted. Its powerful body moved between the girl and the approaching men. The girl could hear its deep breathing. She could feel the tension in the air. The hunters slowly spread out, trying to surround them from different directions. They believed that if they worked together, they could force the girl away from the animal. But they had underestimated the jaguar. The great predator watched every movement. Its ears turned from one hunter to another. Its eyes remained focused. The girl stayed close behind it. One hunter suddenly shouted and raised his wooden spear. The jaguar roared. The hunter stopped. For a moment, nobody moved. Then a second hunter threw a stone. It struck the ground near the jaguar. The animal jumped sideways and released another powerful roar. The girl became terrified. She grabbed the jaguar's fur and tried to move away. The hunters began advancing again. There was no safe direction. Behind them was dense forest. To one side was a steep rocky slope, and ahead were the hunters. The jaguar looked toward the trees. Then it looked at the girl. Suddenly, it turned and began running. The girl followed. They disappeared into the forest. The hunters immediately gave chase. Branches struck against the girl's face as she ran. Roots and stones made every step dangerous. She stumbled once. Before she could fall, the jaguar stopped and turned back. The girl quickly stood. The animal waited for her. She reached out and grabbed its fur. Then they continued running. Behind them, the hunters were getting closer. The forest became darker as they moved deeper beneath the ancient trees. The girl could hear the hunters shouting. She knew they could not keep running forever. Her legs were becoming weak. Her breathing was painful, but the jaguar continued leading her. It knew the forest. It knew the hidden paths. It knew where the hunters could not easily follow. The girl and the jaguar stood on the opposite side of the river. For several moments, neither of them moved. The sound of rushing water filled the valley behind them. The girl looked back. The primitive hunters were still standing on the far bank. They had stopped chasing her for now, but she knew they would not give up. She turned toward the jaguar. The enormous animal was watching the forest ahead. Its ears moved slowly. Something had caught its attention. The girl stepped closer. The jaguar began walking. She followed. Together, they entered a completely unfamiliar part of the ancient wilderness. The forest here was darker. The trees were taller. Vines hung from enormous branches, and thick plants covered the ground. Sunlight barely reached the forest floor. Every few steps, the girl looked around nervously. She had never been here before. The jaguar, however, moved with confidence. It knew exactly where it was going. After several minutes, they reached a narrow opening between two giant rocks. Beyond the opening was a hidden valley. The girl stopped. Her eyes widened. The valley was filled with green vegetation, fresh water, and strange flowers. Birds flew between the trees. Small animals moved through the grass. For the first time in days, the girl felt hope. There was food, there was water, and there were places to hide. The jaguar walked toward a large rock formation. The girl followed. Behind the rocks was a shallow natural shelter. It was protected from rain and wind. The jaguar entered first. The girl sat beside it. She was exhausted. Her feet were scratched. Her clothes were covered with dirt. But she was alive. She looked at the jaguar and gently placed her hand on its fur. The animal remained still. For a moment, everything was peaceful. Then the jaguar suddenly lifted its head. The girl became alert. A distant sound echoed through the valley. A roar. Not the jaguar. Something much larger. The girl and the jaguar continued across the golden landscape. Behind them, the hunters were still trapped in the rocky canyon. For the first time in many days, the girl felt that she could breathe freely. But the feeling did not last long. The jaguar suddenly stopped. Its head lifted. Its ears pointed toward the distant mountains. The girl looked at it. She could not hear anything, but the jaguar could. Somewhere beyond the grassland, something was moving. The animal began walking again. The girl followed closely. The sun climbed higher into the sky. The golden grass moved like waves beneath the wind. Small animals disappeared into underground burrows as the pair approached. Birds circled high above them. Everything seemed peaceful, but the jaguar remained alert. It kept looking toward the mountains. After several hours, they reached the edge of a rocky plateau. Below them stretched a wide valley. A narrow stream crossed the center. There were trees along the water. There were also footprints. The girl crouched down. She touched the ground. The footprints were large, much larger than the jaguar's. She looked at her companion. The jaguar was already staring toward the trees. Its body became tense. A low growl escaped from its throat. The girl stepped closer. Then they heard it. A deep, powerful sound from somewhere inside the valley. The girl froze. The jaguar stood directly in front of her. Whatever was making that sound was close. They waited. Nothing appeared. The wind continued blowing through the grass. The girl slowly relaxed. The jaguar did not. It turned toward the stream. They needed water. The girl followed. They descended carefully into the valley. The rocks were slippery. The girl nearly fell several times. The jaguar waited whenever she became too slow. Finally, they reached the stream. The girl immediately knelt and drank. The water was cold. She splashed some across her face. For a few moments, the night was almost completely silent. The girl walked beside the jaguar through the darkness. The moonlight barely reached the ground beneath the ancient trees. Every step was careful. Every sound made her turn around. Behind them, the hunters were still searching. They had followed the trail for too long to give up now. But the girl was changing. She was no longer the frightened child who had first encountered the jaguar. She had crossed dangerous rivers. She had escaped predators. She had climbed mountains. And through it all, the jaguar had remained beside her. Now they reached the edge of a wide, open valley. The moon illuminated a large field of grass. At the far end stood a massive rock formation. The jaguar stopped. The girl looked ahead. There was something familiar about the place. A small stream flowed beside the rocks. Fresh water, trees, shelter. It could have been a perfect place to rest. But the jaguar did not move. Its eyes remained fixed on the darkness. The girl listened. Nothing. Then she heard footsteps. The hunters. They appeared between the trees. There were several of them. They were tired. Their bodies were covered with mud and scratches. But they were still carrying their wooden weapons. The girl stepped backward. The jaguar moved forward. The hunters spread out. This time, they did not hesitate. One hunter raised his spear. Another moved toward the girl's side. The jaguar growled. The girl looked around. There was nowhere to run. The valley was open. The hunters had surrounded them. Then something unexpected happened. A second roar came from the forest. The hunters froze. The girl turned. The giant predator from the cave had followed them. It emerged from the darkness. The hunters were now caught between two powerful predators. The jaguar looked toward the giant animal, then toward the hunters. The girl understood the danger. If the predators fought, she could be trapped. If the hunt. The morning sun rose slowly above the ancient mountains. Golden light spread across the valley, touching the tall grass and rocky cliffs. The girl walked beside the jaguar. For the first time, she was not running. She was not hiding. She was simply walking. But the wilderness around her remained dangerous. Every sound could still mean danger. Every shadow could still hide a predator. The girl had learned that survival did not mean the danger disappeared. It meant learning how to live with it. The jaguar suddenly stopped. The girl stopped too. It looked toward the grass. Something small moved between the plants. The girl watched carefully. A group of small animals emerged from the grass and quickly disappeared into the trees. The jaguar relaxed. The girl smiled. She was beginning to understand the language of the wilderness. The movement of the ears, the direction of the eyes, the sudden silence of birds, the smell carried by the wind. The ancient world was speaking all around her. She only needed to learn how to listen. The pair continued toward the northern side of the valley. There was a large river there. The girl recognized the water immediately. She remembered the first river they had crossed together. She remembered how the current had almost pulled her away. She remembered the jaguar swimming back for her. She looked at the animal beside her. The jaguar was watching the water. The girl gently touched its shoulder. They continued along the riverbank. After some time, the girl noticed something unusual. Footprints. Human footprints. But these were different. They were smaller. There were many of them. The girl crouched down. She examined the ground. These footprints belonged to her own people. Her eyes widened. Could her group be nearby? The thought filled her with hope. For so long, she had been alone. Perhaps she could finally return home. The jaguar looked at her. The girl began moving quickly. She followed. Several weeks had passed since the girl returned to her people. Life in the camp had slowly returned to normal. The group moved between familiar hunting grounds, searching for water, roots, fruits, and small animals. But the girl had changed. She was more alert than before. She noticed things that others ignored. A broken branch, a strange footprint, a sudden silence among the birds. She had learned these signs from the jaguar. Every morning, she looked toward the distant forest. She never told anyone exactly what she was hoping to see. But deep inside, she was waiting. One evening, as the sun began disappearing behind the hills, the girl was collecting firewood near the edge of the camp. She suddenly stopped. Something had moved in the tall grass. She looked carefully. Nothing. She continued walking. Then she heard a familiar sound. A low, quiet growl. Her heart stopped. Slowly, she turned toward the trees. Two bright eyes appeared in the shadows. The jaguar. The girl could hardly believe it. The animal stood at the edge of the forest, watching her. She dropped the wood. For several seconds, she simply stared. Then she smiled. She slowly walked toward it. The jaguar remained still. The girl stopped a few steps away. She extended her hand. The jaguar moved forward. It gently touched her hand with its nose. The girl closed her eyes. It was as if they had never been separated. But something was different. The jaguar looked thinner. There were fresh scratches across its shoulder. The girl immediately noticed. She touched the injured area carefully. The jaguar did not resist. She became worried. Something had happened to it. The girl looked toward the forest. She understood that the jaguar had not returned simply to visit her. It needed help. She slowly followed it. The jaguar turned and began walking into the trees. The girl followed. But before they could disappear completely, one of the hunters from her group saw Teach. The next morning, the girl woke before sunrise. The camp was still quiet. Most of her people were sleeping around the dying fire. But the girl could not sleep. She stepped outside and looked toward the distant forest. Somewhere beyond those trees lived the jaguar and her cubs. The girl wondered if she would ever see them again. Then she heard a familiar sound, a soft movement in the grass. She turned. There was nothing there. She smiled. Perhaps she was only imagining it. The girl returned to the camp and began helping prepare for another journey. Her people were running low on water and food. The dry season had become stronger. The familiar river was shrinking. The grasslands were turning yellow. Animals were moving toward distant water sources. The elders decided that the group had to leave. They would travel toward the mountains. The girl listened carefully. The mountains. She had been there before. They were dangerous, but she also knew the hidden paths. The group began walking. Children stayed near the adults. Hunters moved around the edges of the group. The girl walked near the front. She constantly watched the ground. She remembered everything the jaguar had taught her, where predators usually waited, where water could be found, which plants were safe, which sounds meant danger. By midday, the group reached a large grassland. The sun was extremely hot. There was almost no shade. The youngest children began slowing down. The girl noticed something moving in the distance. A group of large animals was crossing the grass. They were heading toward the mountains. The girl watched them. The animals were not running. That meant there was no immediate predator nearby. She pointed toward them. The hunters understood. The group followed the animals from a safe distance. The animals eventually led them toward a small water source hidden behind rocks. The people rushed toward it. They drank. The children played in the sh. The roar echoed through the mountains. For a moment, nobody moved. The hunters stood at the edge of the forest. The human group remained gathered around the fire. And beyond them, hidden among the trees, the mother jaguar stood with her cubs. The girl's heart was pounding. She knew what was about to happen. The hunters had come too close. One of them raised his wooden spear. The girl stepped forward. She knew that if they attacked, the jaguar family would fight. And if the jaguars fought, someone could die. The girl raised both hands. She shouted toward the hunters. They stopped. For several seconds, there was silence. Then the oldest hunter stepped forward. He looked at the girl. Then he looked toward the darkness where the jaguar stood. He seemed to understand that the girl was trying to prevent a fight. But another hunter suddenly moved forward. He threw a stone toward the trees. The jaguar roared. The cubs disappeared deeper into the forest. The mother jaguar charged several steps forward. The hunters panicked. They raised their weapons. The girl shouted. The human group moved between the hunters and the forest. They formed a protective line. Nobody wanted to attack, but fear was spreading. The jaguar stood only a short distance away. Its eyes were fixed on the hunters. The girl slowly walked toward the animal. The people behind her became silent. She stopped between the two sides. She looked at the jaguar. Then she looked at the hunters. She slowly lowered her hands. The jaguar stopped growling. The hunters lowered their weapons slightly. The girl had created a moment of peace. But suddenly, a different sound came from the mountains. A deep roar. Everyone turned. The giant predator from the valley had arrived. It emerged from the darkness. The hunters froze. The human group became terrified. The mother jaguar immediately moved toward her cubs. The girl realized the situation had changed completely. The giant P. The seasons began to change. The dry winds slowly disappeared, and clouds returned to the ancient African sky. Rain fell across the grasslands. Rivers became full again. Trees became green. Life returned to every corner of the wilderness. The girl's people moved with the changing seasons. They traveled from one water source to another, always searching for food and safe places to rest. The girl had grown stronger. She was no longer the frightened child who had once wandered alone into the forest. She could recognize animal tracks. She could find water. She could identify safe plants. She knew when a predator was nearby. And most importantly, she knew how to survive. But she still remembered the jaguar. Whenever the group passed near the mountains, she looked toward the forest. Sometimes she found large paw prints beside the river. Sometimes she heard a distant roar. But she never saw her friend. Until one morning, the girl was walking along the edge of the grassland when she noticed something. A familiar footprint. Large, deep, fresh. A jaguar. She crouched down and touched the ground. The print was only a few hours old. Her heart began beating faster. She looked toward the forest. Then she heard a faint sound. A jaguar call. The girl smiled. She knew exactly where to go. She followed the tracks carefully. They led toward a familiar valley. The valley where the jaguar had once raised her cubs. When the girl reached the entrance, she stopped. The cave was empty. There were no cubs. No jaguar. Only old paw prints in the dust. The girl felt a strange sadness. She knew the family had moved on. She walked deeper into the valley. Near the stream, she discovered something. A small bone. It had been carried by a jaguar. She smiled. The animal had been here. Perhaps recently. The girl followed another trail. It led toward a high ridge. She climbed slowly. At the top, she saw the entire valley below. And there, standing. Many seasons had passed since the girl first encountered the jaguar. The world around her had changed. New grasses covered the plains. Rivers had shifted their paths. Old trees had fallen, while young trees grew in their place. But the girl had changed more than the landscape. She was no longer a frightened child. She had become a strong and experienced member of her group. The younger children often followed her. They watched everything she did. They wanted to learn how she could move through the wilderness without fear. One morning, the girl took several children toward a shallow river. She showed them how to look for footprints in the mud. She pointed toward the ground. There were tracks from small animals. Then she showed them larger tracks. The children became excited, but the girl immediately became serious. She explained that large footprints meant danger. The children stayed close to her. She taught them never to approach an unknown animal, never to touch unfamiliar plants, and never to wander away from the group. These lessons had once been learned through fear. Now, she passed them on through wisdom. The group continued traveling. During the dry season, water became difficult to find. The rivers became smaller. The animals moved toward the remaining water sources. The girl noticed something unusual. Birds were flying toward the east. Large herds were also moving in the same direction. She understood what that meant. There was water somewhere beyond the hills. She told the elders. The group followed. After a long journey, they discovered a large freshwater lake surrounded by trees. The children rushed toward the water. The adults followed carefully. The girl looked around. The area seemed peaceful, but she knew better. Water attracted everything. Herbivores, predators, and sometimes danger from below. She warned the group to stay close. The hunters searched the shoreline. They found fresh tracks, large tracks. The dry season returned once again. The rivers became smaller. The grass turned golden, and the animals began moving toward distant sources of water. The girls' group had no choice. They had to travel. For many days, they crossed open plains and rocky valleys. The girl was now one of the most experienced members of the group. She knew how to recognize danger. She knew how to find water, and she knew how to keep the children safe. One afternoon, the group reached a massive river. It was wider than any river they had crossed before. The current was powerful. Trees grew along both banks. Dark shapes moved beneath the surface. The hunters immediately became cautious. They knew the river could be dangerous. The elders searched for a safe crossing. The girl walked along the bank. She studied the water. She noticed birds gathering on the opposite side. That meant there was food and fresh water beyond the river. The group needed to cross. The girl remembered the first time she had crossed a dangerous river with the jaguar. She remembered how frightened she had been. She remembered the powerful current pulling her away. And she remembered the jaguar turning back for her. Those memories gave her courage. She searched for a shallow section. After a long walk, she found one. The river was still dangerous, but the current was slower there. She returned to the group and guided them toward it. The hunters entered first. They tested the ground with long wooden sticks. Then the adults crossed. Children were kept between the strongest members. The girls stayed near the youngest. The water reached their waists. The current pushed against them. Everyone moved slowly. Suddenly, one child lost balance. The girl grabbed him. The current pulled harder. She tightened her grip. Another adult helped. Together, they pulled the child towards safety. The group continued. Finally, everyone reached the opposite shore. They had survived. The girl looked. The group continued moving toward the distant mountains. Days passed. The landscape slowly changed. The open grasslands became rocky valleys. The trees became taller. Streams appeared between the hills. The air became cooler. The girl walked near the front of the group. She was now responsible for helping the younger children. Every morning, she checked the ground for footprints. Every evening, she watched the horizon. She had learned that danger rarely announced itself. Sometimes it came silently. Sometimes it waited in the shadows. And sometimes it followed from a great distance. One afternoon, the group reached a narrow valley. Tall cliffs rose on both sides. A small river flowed through the center. There was plenty of food nearby. The elders decided to stop. The children gathered around the water. The hunters searched the surrounding area. The girl walked along the edge of the valley. Something felt wrong. The birds were silent. There were no small animals near the river. Even the insects seemed unusually quiet. She stopped. She listened. Nothing. Then she noticed the ground. Large footprints. Fresh footprints. She followed them for several steps. They disappeared beneath thick vegetation. The girl immediately returned to the group. She warned the elders. The hunters became alert. They decided to move higher onto the rocky slope. The children were gathered together. Everyone remained quiet. Then a roar echoed through the valley. The sound bounced between the cliffs. The children became frightened. The hunters raised their weapons. The girl looked toward the vegetation. A massive predator slowly appeared. It was larger than any animal the group had encountered before. Its muscles moved beneath its thick coat. Its eyes were fixed on the people. Nobody moved. The girl remembered her past. She remembered the jaguar. She remembered the lessons it had taught her. Do not panic. Do not run without thinking. Watch T. The new valley seemed peaceful. For several days, the group found enough water and food. The children became stronger. The adults rested. The hunters explored the surrounding forest. For the first time in a long while, the people believed they had found a safe place. But the girl knew that the ancient wilderness never remained peaceful for long. One morning, she noticed something unusual. The birds had suddenly disappeared. The forest became silent. She stopped walking. The children behind her stopped too. She listened carefully. A faint rustling came from the bushes. Then another sound. Heavy footsteps. The girl raised her hand. Everyone became still. A large animal moved through the vegetation. The hunters prepared their weapons. But the girl noticed something strange. The animal was not moving toward them. It was running away. Something was chasing it. The girl looked toward the forest. A deep roar echoed between the trees. The entire group became frightened. The girl immediately told everyone to move. They began climbing toward higher ground. The roar became louder. Branches broke. Leaves shook. Then a huge prehistoric predator burst through the trees. It was chasing the fleeing animal. For a moment, it did not notice the humans. Then it saw them. The predator stopped. Its eyes locked onto the group. The hunters stepped forward. The girl quickly moved the children behind a large rock. The predator growled. The hunters shouted. The animal hesitated. Then it turned and disappeared into the forest. Everyone remained silent. The danger had passed, but the girl knew they could not remain there. The predator had discovered their location. The group packed what little they could carry. They moved deeper into the valley. The girl remembered the hidden places she had learned about during her years of survival. She searched for a narrow passage through the rocks. After several hours, she found one. It led into a hidden G. The sun rose over the distant mountains. The human group continued their journey across the ancient valley. Behind them, the hidden refuge slowly disappeared into the morning mist. The girl walked quietly. She had not spoken much since leaving the mountains. Her mind remained with the jaguar. She wondered where the mother and her cubs had gone. But deep inside, she knew they were strong enough to survive. The group traveled for many days. They crossed rocky plains. They followed narrow rivers. They passed through dense forests. Everywhere they went, the girl remembered the lessons of her past. She watched the birds. She studied the footprints. She listened to the wind. She knew when danger was near. One afternoon, the group reached a wide grassland. At the far end stood a massive river. Beyond the river were green forests and distant hills. The elders decided to stop there. The people were tired. They needed rest. The children played near the trees. The hunters searched for food. The girl walked alone along the riverbank. She looked at the water. The river moved slowly beneath the sunlight. Then she saw something, a paw print in the mud. Her heart stopped. It was a jaguar print. Fresh, very fresh. She looked toward the forest. A soft sound came from the trees. The girl stepped forward. Then she stopped. Two eyes appeared between the branches. The jaguar, the same mother, older now. Her cubs were almost fully grown. The girl smiled through tears. She had not expected to see them again. The jaguar slowly stepped out. The girl moved closer. The animal did not show fear. The girl placed her hand against its face. The jaguar closed its eyes. For several seconds, they stood together. No words, no sounds, only the wind moving through the grass. The girl looked at the cubs. They were strong. They no longer needed their mother as they once had. They were ready to begin their own lives. The girl realized something.